He always worked this route, which by the way, is a completely beautiful place. Every time he finished, he usually spent a few pesos on alcohol. But on this opportunity, because he had a family reunion, he wanted to return as soon as possible to his house. But nevertheless, his vice could more, and on the way he decided to drink some drinks at a bar. After that, going through the desert, he decided to sleep a little in that place. He parked outside the road, and a few kilometers before the next town, he decided to sleep, but later he woke up, because he could hear that someone was singing. Confused, he thought it was the radio. But the radio was off, so the singing stopped and became more like a cry for help. That's when he decided to go out and help whoever it was, but he was still confused. So before he got off, he turned on the engine and the lights to see where the cry came from. And who was out there? He opened the window a little and screamed, asking what was happening, but no one answered. Nothing was heard, and at that moment, when he decided to leave the trailer, he could notice a movement in the part where the lights ended. He could distinguish then that it seemed to be a woman, but what caused him a horrible terror was to see that the woman's face was completely dark. The trailer scared them so much that he decided to leave without stopping. Whatever he saw or thought he saw, every time this trailer told that experience, his face paled. He was generally a very happy person. But when he told what had happened to him in the Atacama desert that night, his semblance always changed. That situation scared him to death. A trailer driver from the line drove at dawn to pick up a merchandise. As for trailers, it is not very strange to see people wandering on the edge of the roads in strange situations. It becomes difficult for them to be impressed by this type of situation, unless they deserve it. It was for this reason that this driver who drove calmly, he was not impressed when he saw an old woman at the edge of the road, asking to be taken, so he decided to stop and do her a favor. He got off the trailer and asked this old woman where she was going. She replied that she was going further, since her car had been damaged and she was walking to see if she could find help. The trailer, as a good person who was, he said he would help her. Then he helped her climb. They were for several kilometers talking about life and various situations. When, at one point, the old woman began to tell him about the accident she had. She, along with her daughter, told him it was a fatal accident. She described everything that happened to her. How they lost control in a curve and fell to the side of the road. To which, when hearing that, the incredulous trailer said, "My lady, forgive me, but if that were so, you would be hurt and you have nothing, not a scratch." However, after saying that, and almost reaching a curve, that old woman smiles and says, "You're right." And then he points to the curve, saying, "That curve, there's the car." Then he stops carefully and looks at the edge of the curve to see the daughter's car, when the old woman suddenly tells him, "In that curve we die, she and I." When the trailer turned to see her, that old woman had disappeared. The scared one got off the trailer and looked everywhere. But there was nothing, no car, no old woman, no one. That trailer left that place immediately and prayed all the way to his destination. I was driving home one night on the Mexico-Cuernavaca Highway, after finishing with the shipments that they had ordered. I hadn't seen my family for approximately 2 weeks, something normal for trailers, so for that reason I was going with a lot of emotion. Maybe that was the reason why I decided to take a shortcut through a desolate area that I didn't know too well. I had heard stories of that area, and in most of them, they were stories of ghosts and other paranormal events, but I did not believe in that, or in anything supernatural. It was approximately around 4 in the morning. On the previous occasions that I went through that detour, I did it during the day, and nothing unusual had ever happened to me. In a moment I arrived at an area full of trees that had a spooky tone, as usual. My radio was on and out of nowhere it started making a horrible static sound and began to crackle through the speakers. After those moments, I began to feel an uncomfortable cold and crossing in the middle of those trees. I could see something that looked like a person that was hanging. His body even bounced from side to side. That surprised me a lot. But anyway, I decided to stop the trailer to investigate what it could be. I was confused. I didn't know if what I actually saw was the body of a person. And if it was like that, I would try to help if it was still possible. So I took my coat, the flashlight, and the gun I always had with me. I had my phone in my pocket and I started marking 911. But in that place there was no signal. I walked through the bushes, and when I got to that tree, in which I was sure I had seen it, the body was gone. I started to light around, looking to see if I could see it in some other place, or if I had mistaken it for a tree. But nothing. I thought I might have imagined it. Or maybe that person, when they saw me, had freed themselves. I don't know. So I went back to my trailer. But when I looked back at that moment, there was the body again. Hanging. Just as I had seen it before. I started my trailer and left as fast as I could. After that event, I never took a shortcut again that I didn't know. And much less in the middle of the night. A few years ago, I was driving down a stretch of a road located in Aguas Calientes. They were on a shift known as encounter and return. In that shift is where the driver who is domiciled outside the city must drive a load halfway towards his destination, while another driver is with him halfway on that path. And then this last one carries the load where it needs to be delivered. I had been doing that for a long time. And in this opportunity that I want to share with you, I had to meet the other driver at the point, an hour before he arrived. When I got to that section, that place was a dark and empty place. It was around 3 in the morning. So since there was still some time, I decided to take a little nap. But nevertheless, about 10 minutes later, I heard that a dog began barking loudly. Those barks woke me up. I tried to ignore them. But I heard that every time those barks were stronger, and I heard them closer to my trailer. At that point, it became clear to me that that dog was trying to scare something, so I sat down and looked out the window to see where it was. But what I saw left me immobile. A few meters from my trailer, there was a big man, and I could see that those barks were being produced by him. The cold hit me, and without making any sudden movement, I turned on the trailer, and I began to move away slowly as I was gaining speed. That man began to follow me, and as if treating an angry dog, he was barking loudly, but luckily I managed to get away. It's not necessary to say that after that opportunity, I never wanted to take a break in the middle of the road, and much less at night. My dad is a trailer. It's rare that he comes home for so much traveling. On the weekends, he tells me how he was doing on trips and things like that. He told me that once he went to Torreón, and how tired he was, he stopped to sleep on the edge of the road. The terrain was alone. There was no other trailer. Then my dad decided to sleep. He didn't last 10 minutes asleep, when he said he felt like he was being moved by the trailer. He thought it might be the air. But it wasn't like that. He looked out the mirrors, and there was nothing. He lay down for a while, and when he barely caught the dream again, they knocked on the door very hard, which made my father get up angry. Then he lowers the window. In that he leans down and sees that there is a lady in black who did not let his face be seen. My father asked her, "What do you want, ma'am? Why do you knock so hard on the door?" The lady answered him with an infinity of words, that he could not understand anything, while she had her hands together. My father, the only thing he could do, he could turn on the trailer and continue on his way. Meanwhile, he was praying and entrusting himself to God. Several friends of his, also trailers, have commented that that old woman is a witch, a lady who was run over on that road. Others say that maybe she lived near a town and her spirit is surrounding her, or that maybe they dropped his cross. In total, many things are said, but this is what happened to my father, who since then no longer sleeps towards Torreón. On one occasion, giving support to the FedEx company, he was traveling alone to Tijuana, crossing the road, Caborca-Zonoita. As you know, we spend a lot of time behind the wheel. Sometimes we go through places where we can do our needs without problems. But sometimes, we have our desires and a very betraying stomach. And once we are locked up on the road, we have to stop at the edge of this. This time, I was ready to stop my unit. And I turned off all the lights in the trailer. Because sometimes, if you leave the lights on, some colleagues stop to see if we're okay or if we have any mechanical failure. And with the lights off, they don't stop because they think we're resting, so I turned them off. Then I took my flashlight and went down to the shore. I had been there for a little time when I started hearing screams. But they were many screams. Screams of men, women and even children. It was very strange to me because on that road, at that time of the morning, who was going to be there? In the middle of nowhere, regardless of that, I continued with what was mine. When I started to hear that steps were approaching me, I, with a little fear, tried to determine what had started. So I didn't take much importance. I continued in it when, 10 meters, I saw that inside the swamp of the mountain, there was a very high man, about 2 meters high. Rather, it was like a shadow, and I noticed that he had red eyes. He could be distinguished well in the darkness of the night. As I cleaned myself at that moment, and even the flashlight was forgotten. I ran to my trailer like this, with my pants down, holding it with my hands. I got there all scared and clumsy as I could. I took the trailer off and quickly left that place. I remembered that I had left my flashlight lying there on the mountain. But believe me, I didn't want to go back to that place, or to ever stop at the edge of the road to do my business again. I was driving for about an hour, when some irresistible desire to go to the bathroom took away the comfort of the trip. I slowed down to park on one side, taking advantage of the fact that no one was nearby. I say this because we are also easy targets for criminals who come or carry any situation to assault on the roads. As soon as I got down, I walked to some tall bushes, and in the middle of the darkness I started to do my thing. But I noticed that I was doing it on something that seemed to be a stone. I was finishing, when the unmistakable feeling that someone was nearby shook me. I looked everywhere, but there was no one. Despite that, I could not help feeling scared, so I got on the trailer. But the moment I gave it a start, I could see with wide eyes the presence of someone on the other side of the door. I was not mistaken. Through the window, I saw a man standing in the middle of the weeds. The twilight only allowed me to recognize his figure. He had a hat. Alerted by the fear that it could be a member of the crime, I left the place driving at full speed. Minutes later, I contacted my fellow trailers on the radio, warning them that there was a man of suspicious characteristics wandering the road. Some joked, while others thanked me. Well, between all of us, we had that trust. However, there was one who, seriously, recommended me that I not stop for anything in the world, and that I drive until I reach my destination, because it could be about the soul and pain of someone who lost his life there. That provoked the laughter of all, who, on the radio, encouraged me to stop that specter. Something to which I also joined my jokes. I had already taken my head off the encounter with that man, when the cell phone indicated that I was already recovering the signal. I began to receive messages from my wife. Something common in her when I didn't answer her messages. I never liked using the phone while driving, so I stopped for a moment to write to her. I was in that when, again, the feeling of fear came back little by little. I turned my head and saw the same man I saw kilometers ago, on the other side of the door. Only now, some lights illuminated that part of the perimeter, so I was able to see him completely. It was a young man, whose figure looked like a skull. His body leaned slightly to his left side, because the leg on that side was broken at the height of the thigh. I lost sight of all reality before such a horrible scene, being astonished. But that, I was forced to react when I saw him move and start walking towards me. With that creepy movement, I threw the phone to one side and drove without stopping, understanding just that whoever had warned me knew what he was talking about. I arrived in the city and stayed until I could regain my lucidity, so I could return. Days later, I contacted the trailer that had warned me to tell him what happened. Even though I insisted that he tell me what he knew about it, he only limited himself to tell me that the next time he passed by the place where I went to urinate, he would check the area, but that it never looked like that at night. The opportunity came, after a month, when, being midday, I passed by the place and stopped. I walked through the place, until I recognized the exact place where I stopped. That's where I understood that the place where I had stayed to do my thing was not a stone what was between the weeds, but a gravestone. The soul of the deceased who rests in that place, he was upset by my insolence and wanted to let me know. According to his company colleagues, he was going down the road to the Chaco, and that, in a moment, he sees that a dog is practically crossing over him. He, without being able to dodge it, feels that he is hit, and incredibly, at that very moment, he saw a horse, a poacher, running by his side, that is, he was doing it next to the trailer. When he looked at him, he assured that this was not a horse as he thought, but that he saw a huge dog, which was dragging a very thick chain from its neck. He told one of his companions that he saw on this animal the silhouette of a person, of a man. He could only see that, the silhouette, because it was very dark, and as he says, this appearance was completely black. And in a moment, he saw it as if he had moved towards him in the trailer, and suddenly, he already had him sitting next to him. He says that when he saw him, he was so scared that he lost control of the trailer and went outside, suffering an accident that would later cost him his life. But before he died, when he was transferred and at the moment he could talk, he told one of his companions that the man who was sitting next to him was a demon, that he had seen when he turned the trailer and also saw that huge dog that was thrown at the feet of this man, and that at this appearance he could not see his face well because it was dark, but he said that everything that was the chest area was only visible to him. This man died. According to what my father told me, there were companions who said that this man, before he became a trailer, had had a very complicated life, that, according to what they told me, had killed a man and his son, and assured that in the family of the two victims he had killed, there was a lady who was a very strong sorcerer of the area, and they believed that what happened to him was a work of that lady and that the demon was to be charged with those lives that this man had taken. In a village called Colorins, near Valle de Bravo, I met an old trailer called Gerardo. He had a daughter, and for that reason I frequented his family. On one occasion, she invited me to swim at a place called El Cerrillo, and as expected, I went with them. When I returned to Colorins, Mr. Gerardo began to tell me stories of his trailer trips. To be more precise, horror stories. And of all the ones he told me, I share the one that was most interesting and surprising for me. Gerardo told of an occasion he was heading to San Luis Potosi. It was around 2:30 in the morning, when suddenly the trailer stopped in a corner for no reason. Desperate and scared by the place where it stopped, I took my signals and waited to see if someone passed. But nothing. I remember that there was a very thick fog and it was cold. And in a moment of waiting so long, I fell asleep. But suddenly I woke up when I heard that someone touched my window. I got up immediately to see who it was. But I only saw a figure. I looked at the clock and it was almost 4:30 in the morning. I didn't see any trailer or any car parked. So, for safety, I took my baseball bat and got out. When I got out, that subject greeted me. "Hello, friend." To which I replied, "Hello." The person was a thin guy with a hat and a poncho of colors, typical of the towns. That man told me, "I checked your truck while you were sleeping. Be careful, you may be surprised." I answered, "Thank you." I have been overcome by sleep. Are you a mechanic? I noticed that this man smiled and answered me, no, but I've seen cases like this. The truck has no water. If you like, my house is a few kilometers from here. Why don't you follow me? I told him I couldn't leave the trailer, but I had my doubts, so I went down to see the radiator, and yes, I had no water. But when I touched it, I felt that the radiator was very hot. I had no other choice. In those 2 hours that I was waiting for help, he was the only person who passed by that road. So I followed this subject, not without first thinking, how was it possible that the trailer was still hot if it had already been stopped for a good while? And also, it was cold outside. Even so, I took a bottle and my bat. I started following that man. The more we walked, the more we entered the forest that was in front of the curve where I had been stranded. We walked for several minutes, and this subject did not say a word. He was totally quiet. When it began to clear up, I started asking them if there was much left to get there. The man simply denied with his head and kept walking, without talking to me. I was worried, but I needed the water. So I followed the man, but after a while I asked them again if there was much left, and that man stopped dry. And I could notice that I was next to a very small cave surrounded by trees and foliage. I remained still, and that man invited me to follow, but I did not want to do it, and I began to go back. And suddenly, that man began to laugh macabrely and run to the trees. When I looked at him, I could see that he was standing on a branch, which, with a shrill voice, told me, "Thank you." I was sleeping. I was. At that moment, I noticed that I was meters away from a cliff. I was scared. I turned around and ran in a hurry to get out of the forest. When I did it, I saw that there was another trailer and 2 patrols. When I got there, they asked me if the trailer was mine. I said, yes, I ran out of water. That's all. The police officers looked at me incredulously and the other trailer asked me, and did you get the water? I replied that no. Then the trailer man told me that he would give me a little, and the officer who had interrogated me told me that he would give me coffee. After that, I noticed that they looked at me as if they were hiding something. Then the other officer told me, "Come on, man, just say it and we'll believe you, I promise." I was surprised and I told them what they were talking about. The other trailer then asked me if I was new on the road, which I told them yes. Then he said, "That explains everything. Did you already look where your trailer stopped?" When I looked where he pointed me, I was stunned. Next to the trailer, just when turning the curve, there were several crosses. This trailer driver went there and pointed at an old cross. And he said, "I present you to the old man on the road. But I think you already know him." After that, the officers asked me to tell them what happened to me. And after telling them everything, one of them told me, "Pay attention, friend. Now you will hear the legend of this subject. It happened several years ago, when the news was given that a man was found in the cliff. Unlike all those found there, this man was a native of the region, who was informed that he came out to bring water from a well that is here on the other side of the curve. But for his bad luck, he found some road robbers, that is, truckers. The robbers asked for the water, but the native refused. So these bad people hit him and stabbed him. Then, they threw him into the cliff so as not to leave any trace. What they did not know was that a trailer driver who stopped to do his needs saw them in the distance, and he reported the crime to the authorities. When they stopped them, one of the involved was a trailer driver of this road, who knew the times of the heavy loads. This subject, it was he who stabbed him and threw him into the gutter. Since then, many trailer drivers have died right here, and others have been found in that gutter. Also, when the native does not stab them, he takes out the radiator and supposedly helps them later. When he gains confidence with his victim, he takes him to the gutter and throws them there. Just as they did to him. But this native only does that to the trailers, since only from them have we found their bodies. After knowing that, I was terrified, and as expected, I requested my change of route, so as not to have to go through those directions again. Carlos, who worked as a truck driver for many years, told of one of those trips to the province of Córdoba. Going along Route 157, at the height of a town called San José de la Dormida, there is a cemetery that is a few meters from the road. He tells us that he was traveling on this route and it was approximately 1 in the morning. This happened in the first days of June, and he says it was quite cold. He was driving slowly, reaching an area called the Salinas, says that at one point he felt a nauseating smell. Someone who travels on the road interprets that this smell is from some dead animal, which is what he actually thought at that time. Something that usually happens a lot because on the edge of the road there are many animals that are hid by vehicles. So he didn't find it strange. But at one point he felt very strong, like suffocating, so much so that he, despite the cold, had to lower the window. But even so, that smell did not disappear, and it accompanied him for several minutes. When suddenly, he felt something on his neck. He reacted and hit himself, like when one feels, for example, that a bug is walking. Then he reacted trying to get out and immediately turned on the light in the cabin and tried to look at his neck in the mirror he had inside. A mirror that was big, that he practically didn't use, of course, because he had the trailer's load behind and he didn't see anything. Then he looked at that mirror and when he did, he saw behind him a person who he realized that it was a man, an old man. And at the moment he was looking at him, he put his hand on his shoulder. He, scared, took it out with his hand. And he felt something rigid, very cold. And immediately, he felt a laugh that he describes as if it were that of an old smoker, of those people who have difficulty breathing. And he began to tell this apparition in a loud voice, "I don't want you in here. Get out, in the name of God, go." And then he began to pray. He says he heard this apparition cough, and that again it was like he touched his hair. He moved forward and when he turned his gaze back, when he turned to look, he was gone. He was very slow, but he started to accelerate to move away from the place, and when he did, he saw that someone was crossing the road about 30 meters in front of him, when he was arriving. He could clearly see that it was that old man that he had seen inside his cabin. But he realized that this man was walking towards a cemetery that was a few meters from the road. A cemetery with some low walls that if one passes looking at during the night he doesn't even see it. But he with the high lights of the trailer could see it. He says that this old man walked until he got lost in that place. Carlos worked for many years after that, and it was hard for him to travel at night. He also had to do it, but it was hard for him. He was very afraid. So, on many occasions, he took a friend or someone to accompany him on those lonely roads. My uncle, a trailer driver in Mexico, has lived countless paranormal experiences in his walks and trips. But there was something in particular that disturbed him, and made him re-educate about whether he wanted to continue with that profession. It was a Thursday night, when he left Tijuana to take a shipment to Oaxaca. It turns out that the delivery time was short, and he decided to follow the route without stopping to rest, but he hadn't slept much, so he decided not to expose himself and only made a stop, at the height of La Piedad. That is located between the limits of Guanajuato and Michoacán. He reported that in addition to his bunk, he carried a large amount of extra package, so he decided to sleep in his driver's seat, stretching his legs. He parked the trailer under an old and almost dry tree, with the intention of not being totally outdoors, and then he went to sleep. But he comments that he could not do it at all, since he felt that someone was looking at him. This bothered him, and when he looked around the trailer, he did not see anyone. Everything was very quiet. So the night continued, until during the morning, an intense cold invaded him. The darkness was dense, and for the second time, he felt that feeling again that they were looking at him in a penetrating and malevolent way. He couldn't take it anymore. He looked at his watch. This one said it was 3:33. Then he decided to turn on the trailer to move it to another, more illuminated place. When he sat down, he looked at both sides, he put his mirror in place, and then he looked up, towards that old tree. And that's when he almost stopped, since between the branches of that tree he saw that there was a man hanging from a branch with his eyes open and looking at him fixedly. My uncle came out of a jump from the trailer and ran without stopping until he reached the gas station that was almost 200 meters away. He entered the store screaming and over-slamming. The customers, dispatchers, and even some policemen who were there, looked at him with strangeness, as if he were a madman. In that, the policeman who calmed him approached him, and my uncle explained what happened. He didn't want to move. He was frozen, terrified, and confused. After a while, the policemen, they convinced him to accompany him to his trailer, to do a review of the surroundings, but when they got there they found nothing. They also checked the tree, but there was no trace of anything. There was only a stinky smell, similar to when eggs are thrown away. It soon dawned, and the police recommended that he move from there, and they suggested a medical checkup, but my uncle refused. After calming down a bit, he rested for a while in the gas station store. At the same time, he was talking to a lady who was doing the cleaning, who in fact was a neighbor of the area. And that lady told my uncle something that left him shocked. She told him that in that tree, a hanged man appeared, and it was said that that road was old. It was a road of cartels and revolutionaries, and that, in those trees, they hung the rebellious, the combatants, and also the thieves, and that, over time, there appeared an evil man, of whom only his shadow was seen, and at the same time he gave off a disgusting smell. That is why the locals, they marked those trees with lime crosses. Although my uncle saw those marks, he ignored them. He then returned to the road and took his way, not without having taken a photograph of the place. And here I leave you the image. It was around the 80s. By that time, I was starting to drive the full, which is a double-box trailer. I worked for a company in Leon, Guanajuato, where we carried leather from Coahuila to Leon. There is a climb that has like 4 or 5 curves, and from there all the flatness begins. It's kilometers to get to what was the Chinese wall, reaching Saltillo. Then I was walking around and behind me I saw a bus in the mirror. Then, this one started to turn on the lights so that I could give it a pass. But I couldn't bring the double box. Apart from that, we were in the curves. But as soon as I started to see that the flat was coming, I gave it a pass. It started to get dark. It was like 8 at night. Then that bus overtook me. Then it turned on the lights, thanking me. And it left. But in the distance, maybe about 5 kilometers, I saw that that bus turned on the directional lights. I thought it was in a curve on the flat. Then I said, well, what have they seen? Something on the flat? Some animal or something like that? I more or less calculated where they had done that, and approaching that place began to give me chills. I said, maybe they are animals, horses or something that walks around there, something that walks loose. When it was time to get more or less where I saw that the bus stopped, I began to slow it down, and in the middle of the roadside, a woman was walking. I saw that he was wearing a black coat, and when he walked, his body was visible, but he was a normal person, a very, very pretty girl. Then I almost stopped. In those days, one did not stop for morbidity or things like that, but simply because I thought he had had an accident and that the girl was walking to ask for help. So when I walked past her, she turned to look at me, and gave me a smile. It was a beautiful smile. She was a very pretty person. And a few meters later, I almost stopped. And it was then that when I looked in the mirror, the girl was already walking close to the second box of the trailer. I turned on the lights in the back. And I went backwards to see if I offered her something. And almost reaching where I was, I turned around and saw that the girl was still there. She was still there, at the same distance from a few minutes ago. I told myself that that wasn't normal. She didn't come near, nor did she look at me again. She was just standing there. I immediately saw that. I left there and started climbing the mountain. Almost halfway there was a chapel and a rest area. When I got to that place, I saw that there were those on the bus, and I noticed that there were people crying, with their knees in pain. Then they made me signs that I should stop. When I did it, I noticed that they were people from the north, both the collector and the bus driver. They asked me what I saw, and I said, nothing. There was a very pretty girl in the middle of the road. Why didn't they take her? And they said to me, "You're crazy, man. That wasn't a girl. It was a skeleton walking on a pedestal." But I said in a disbelieving way that that was a lie and that they were not kidding me. But they said to me, "Well, it is true. Ask the passengers. Look how they are crying and drenched in the image of the Virgin." When I saw that, I questioned myself if what they were telling me was true. Then they told me to go with them and go after me. I was carrying a heavy load, but they still accompanied me to Saltillo. When I got there, in the first roundabout, they stopped me again and asked me, "You don't believe it, do you?" I said no, the truth is no. Then they left. They were going to Mexico. I couldn't sleep all the way, and when I got to San Roberto, I wanted to sleep in the gas station. I was in that, watching people coming and going to the restaurant. When I felt that something, a force or something, I wanted to lie down on the seats. Suddenly I reached a rosary that they brought in the trailer and I grabbed it, and I pressed it with my hands. I got scared and I couldn't stop until Leon. At about 6 or 7 in the morning, I got to the company where we were going to unload. And some of my colleagues told me, "What happened that you didn't get here?" So I told them what happened to me on the way. But they took it as a joke and made fun of me. But a little later, and on that same road, I found out that that entity also disappeared from them, and that one of them died of the impression. But most of the trailers say they saw her walking in a skeleton form, not like I saw her, like a beautiful woman. It's been about 20 years since I've been transporting products and merchandise to different states of Mexico. This happened to me about 3 years ago, when I was learning to drive a fifth-wheel trailer. My teacher was an ex-companion of my father, from his old job. One Monday at about 12 p.m., we left for Monterrey and Nuevo Leon. Everything was fine, until suddenly he got out of the truck and told me to take the wheel. I gladly accepted. We traveled several kilometers. It was already night, like 3 in the morning, when he tells me to stop, since he wanted to go down to buy his dose. He usually bought cocaine. I stopped and left. The place where I bought it was in the middle of a lot of lots. I waited for him for 2 hours, and he didn't come. When I was thinking of going down and looking for him, I heard a loud scream, very dark and excruciating, which made me think the worst. I quickly got off the trailer and ran to where I had heard the scream, but I didn't find anything. The truth is, I was very scared and I started to feel how the weather was getting cold and my skin was itching. So I decided to go back. It was about 20 minutes when I heard that same screaming scream again, and after that, about 5 minutes later, my partner left the jungle, without any scratch and with nothing in his hands. As soon as we left, I could see that he was no longer the same. He had his gaze lost. He was quiet. I asked him, "What's wrong? Since we met at that place, you haven't spoken. Are you okay? Did something happen?" But I never wanted to mention what I had heard. He didn't answer me. I didn't insist. Until after several kilometers I asked him the same question again. Then he told me, "You won't believe what happened to me." When I was coming back, in the middle of the jungle I heard my name being said. When I turned, like 20 meters from me, there was a pig standing on 2 legs, and he was telling me with his hand, come here." But at the same time, he shouted very loudly and tenebrously. I was immobile. But when the pig started to approach me, out of nowhere a white cat came out and stood in front of him. This cat screamed as if it were going to fight him. By doing that, that pig disappeared. And a few seconds later, that little white cat also disappeared, but when he did it, he left a very rich perfume smell. And you know what caught my attention the most about that perfume? It was that it was the one my grandmother used. She just died a few months ago. This story, I know it's hard to believe. In fact, it was hard for me to believe it too. But those screams I heard in the cornfield, and the way he told me, left me with an immense doubt. It was a trip from Michoacan to Cancun. I had to carry a load of heavy metal and rods for the construction of a building. As is well known, in those years, it was all much calmer than today. The truth was very rare that they would assault you on the road. The common thing was small accidents, such as, for example, that a tire blew out or you got out of the road because of sleep and fatigue. That morning I was very calm driving as always, with a lot of caution. When out of nowhere on the side of the road I could see in the distance what seemed to be the silhouette of a woman. She was standing with a sign in her hand and she was lying next to a tree. As I got closer, I could see that in fact it was a beautiful woman who was standing on the shore, which is not normal at all, since it was late at night. In my interior, I thought and hesitated for a few moments to stop or not, because there were two options. That woman was real and needed my help in reality, or that it was a trap to try to kidnap me or steal the cargo and money from the travel expenses that I was carrying with me at that time. But even so, my curiosity and instinct to want to help was stronger than the fear that woman made me feel, so I stopped a little further ahead of her. I stopped the trailer, getting down with a small bat that I always carried with me for anything. I said a little nervous as I approached her. I saw with a little bit of curiosity that she had on a very short green dress that let me see her well-formed figure in the dim moonlight. The fear for that moment had become something more than curiosity. I insisted a little louder, however, I could not get any answer. When I was already about 5 meters from that woman, who at no time gave me her face and looked down, I could realize with great terror, that woman had no feet, but she didn't float either, but from her calves down, she had horse hooves. When I saw this, I was frozen. I didn't know what to do. When that woman started to turn, I could see that she literally had no face. She just had a huge black hole. How could I get out of the amazement looking to get out of that situation? I ran to my trailer as fast as I could. I started it desperately and started driving. When I looked through my mirrors, I realized that thing was running behind me. At times, I could clearly feel how the trailer moved. It was as if something hit it from the back. But it was something impossible, since at that moment I had taken a great speed, some 160 kilometers per hour, or that's what the dashboard marked. I also thought that maybe they were just my nerves, or I was passing the bumps or small speed bumps without even seeing them. My desperation and my fear did not let me see well. Already advancing some 10 kilometers, I stopped listening to those blows that until that moment I thought it was because of the bad state of the road. I found a rest stop and stopped, a little to assimilate what had happened to me. I had etched in my mind the face and legs of that woman who had been left behind kilometers ago. My mind could not stop thinking about that. I took the rosary that I always had hung in the mirror and put it on my neck. I took a little of the soda I was carrying and rested. I was about to turn on the trailer again to continue with my way, when, from one moment to another, I began to feel a deep sleep and tiredness. I felt extremely weak. My vision began to cloud. I did not know when I fell asleep, nor how long had passed. But when I woke up, I looked at my watch, and it was already 4:18 in the morning. I closed my eyes to take another drink of soda. I turned on the truck. But this one didn't turn on. It said the battery was dead. This was very strange, because the lights and the radio did turn on perfectly. I stayed thinking for a few seconds about what was happening, and suddenly I felt clearly how they were getting up on the truck's step next to the co-pilot. It was very clear how someone or something got on the roof of the cabin and started jumping. I immediately raised the windows, trying to start the trailer, but it didn't start and I could feel it again. How that thing ran from end to end above the truck. It all remained silent for a moment, which I took the opportunity to lower the window and look out to see what was happening. Now, I didn't think it was just my imagination, because at that moment I already thought everything was possible. When I looked out the window, towards the back of the trailer, I saw what looked like a monkey. At least that's what I thought at that moment. It was a black creature with a humanoid shape sitting on its haunches, in the back of the trailer. I could see how that animal fixed its eyes on me and smiled at me. When I saw this, my whole body was filled with horror and a tremendous cold. I couldn't take it anymore with fear and nerves. I was in panic. I just asked God for the truck to turn on. When I tried to turn it on repeated occasions, that thing started to jump and move the unit, which intrigued me a lot since it was a fairly heavy truck and with the tons of metal it carried, it was something very complicated that it moved like that and only by such a small thing. I was about to run out into the middle of nowhere, but I stopped because I knew that if I did, that would be my end. Until after so many attempts, the trailer started. Immediately I accelerated like crazy again, and kilometers ahead, I could see in the mirror how that thing, with a great jump, got off the trailer and went into the bush. Upon reaching the next town, it was about 7 in the morning, and a little more relaxed. I found myself in a small cafe with other colleagues who were there having breakfast, who, when they saw me a little pale, asked me what had happened to me. When I told them what happened to me, drivers, for a long time now, could agree with me that that monkey and that woman had looked like them too, and that even some other companions had not had the same luck as I had, because these had died or had had serious accidents on that part of the road. After almost 30 years of all those events, today I have come across people who have seen those terrifying appearances in the same way. Something that undoubtedly shows that it does not matter the time or place, that everywhere, there are these kinds of strange situations, and it is difficult to find a logical explanation for them. I was in a rural part of Mississippi, somewhere between Clarksdale and Greenwood. I was back home. Time had become quite threatening, so I called my wife, and I told her that there were warnings of strong winds and very possible tornado threats, and that as soon as I got to a safe area, I would call her again. I had been driving for 14 hours. So I had a coffee and woke myself up and alerted myself. If you have never driven through flat land at night for hundreds of kilometers, I tell you that it is very tiring and exhausting to do it in adverse weather conditions. I had driven maybe about 30 miles when the hail began to bounce on the roof of my trailer. Being a native of Mississippi, I knew that in July the hail meant one thing, that a tornado was approaching. I went to one side because I was in the middle of nowhere. There were no lights to see, nor cars behind or in front of me. I began to look to the sides, looking for the storm or the tornado, which I thought was approaching me. So I lowered the passenger window and looked, but luckily there was nothing. But when I turned to the driver's side, there was a guy with his face stuck to the glass, smiling from ear to ear. That was a very tall, pale man, but the smile is what really scared me, since he had it from ear to ear, with twisted teeth. It was quite creepy. From the impression, I yelled out of terror and he left. My trailer was on the move, so I stepped on the accelerator and ran away from there. In the trailers I drive, we have cameras. I stopped, not even getting to the first safe place, and called my wife. But I didn't want to scare her, so I didn't mention the guy the first saw or the storm. However, moments later, I took out the SD memory and checked the recordings, but the guy never appeared in the recordings, both front and back. I have always interpreted it as an act of my imagination, or possibly an entity that the cameras could not capture. But whether it was my imagination or not, that doesn't take away from the fact that it was a pretty horrible experience. Be careful on the roads. I've been driving trailers in Mexico for 31 years, and just a few months ago, this event happened to me. Hard to believe that I want to share with you. I was coming back from San Jose de Iturbide, heading to Mexico City. For that, it was 3 in the afternoon when I crossed to Tlamalco, in Toluca. Suddenly I saw a family of 4 people. They were asking trailers for a ride, but no one was going to take them. It was as if my companions ignored them. It was possible, due to the load and the risk we carried, that no one was going to lift them, since it could be an attempt at robbery. I just doubted it, since the woman who came before me was with a little girl of about 5 years old, and they looked sick, sad and tired, compared to the man who I think was her husband, and an 8-year-old boy, who looked in perfect condition. For humanity, I braked the trailer, and I made signs in the mirror that they could get up. I got off the trailer to help them get up, and when I touched her hands, I noticed that they were cold. I didn't give them importance. The first ones to approach were the lady and the girl, who looked sick. They thanked me, and without asking for permission, they got into the bunk where I had my bed. I didn't see any problem with them and left them there. Moments later, the husband and the son reached me, who asked me to, please, I would bring them to a town. After that, they would walk until they got to their house. I accepted and I took them up, and we started the road. At one point, I saw that the boy was serious. So I told him that he could go up to sleep in the bunk, that there was also no inconvenience. I imagined that he wanted to go with his mother and his sister. But he answered me that he didn't. That he wanted to be close to his father. I drove down to the center of Toluca. And the man began to cry. I felt sorry for him, and I asked him if something was wrong with him, or if I could help him. But the man politely answered me, "Thank you, Mr. Trailer. You've already done enough with us. The truth is, today is a very sad day for us. Because it's been a year since my wife and my daughter left us. Look at how much they've come. Like to ask for a ride because I don't have money to eat and feed my son. Friend Trailer, I used to have a company and we never lacked anything. I had good income, but when my wife left, everything changed. I got addicted to alcohol. I neglected my business and my son. We were in ruin. And they took my house and now we have nothing." The answer from the man surprised me. Well, what kind of man was this, who starts talking about an ex-wife in front of his partner and children? I think the guy was delirious, but he sounded so real and so sad that it moved me. All the way, he and his son were sad, like crying. I was almost about to take the Toluca-Mexico Highway, and I asked him if they lived far away. He told me that up to Lerma. As he told me that he would walk from where he would leave his house, I felt bad, so I brought them as close as possible to Lerma. I stopped there and they got off with me. I asked the man if they had eaten, and he answered that only the boy, because he spent as little as he had brought to come see his wife and daughter. Once again before those words, he turned me around and I was left without understanding. I gave him 100 pesos, which I brought in my bag so that he could buy something to eat, and then I said goodbye to them until I remembered that the woman and her daughter were not yet down from the bunk. The man let go of his tears at my noble gesture and embraced me in gratitude. In that I told him that, please, they were going to wake up his wife and his daughter, who were possibly tired of walking so much. But what the man told me, I was speechless. And I almost fainted in that instant. Friend, which woman and child are you talking about? I only come with my son. In fact, we were walking because today, just a year ago, we were coming in my car from the state of Mexico and a bus crashed into us. Only my son and I were left alone. We came to put flowers and candles right where they died and we do it to remember them. I was in panic. I asked who had gone up to the trailer first. So I went up to the bunk to investigate. And it was true. This was empty. There was no one there. Except for some little girl's things. How could these women not be there? If I helped them get up. I ran away from the fear I had. And I begged God to help me. And that nothing bad would happen to me. In fact, I called my daughter, and I told him to speak to me on speaker so that the scare would not faint me. Thank God I arrived in Mexico City. I kept the trailer, and I returned home flying, telling my family what had happened. They came to the conclusion that many times our family members who have a better life do not transcend or rise to another spiritual plane, because they know that we are not well, and that their loss affects us, as in this case had happened with that man and his son. This happened a long time ago, approximately 20 years. A very friendly trailer of the family was my father's companion. Once upon a time, I remember it was on a good night, he told us that on one of his many trips by the roads that surround the San Jose Dam, he saw something that took him out of his judgment for a moment. As he was passing through that road in his trailer, night had fallen, and only with the light of the full moon, he suddenly saw a woman, or that's what he thought it was. That woman was going up one of the sides of the road. However, he believed it was a product of his imagination. But his surprise was that when he crossed with that woman, she raised her hand asking for a ride, to which he slowly agreed. But at that moment, stories of his fellow trailers, stories of ghosts and strange beings, flooded his head, and that prevented him from stopping. As he resumed his march, and just as he was recovering from the event, he took a terrifying surprise when he looked in the mirror. His eyes did not believe what he was looking at, since at the same time as the trailer, that woman ran at full speed, screaming, voicing rudeness and cursing him, but the most terrifying was to see the face of that witch woman, since it was the face of a horse with eyes that shone. This friend said that the only thing he could do, in addition to accelerating to the top, was to pray as much as he could and as he could. But what worked for him was the prayer of the Magnificat, who, when he began to pray, looked at the mirror with a wide eye, and that strange appearance disappeared. Time later, this man left that job, maybe out of fear, or as he said, because it was a very heavy job. In reality, only he knows what was the real reason. I think it was the fear of coming across that woman with a horse face, near the San Jose Dam. It was a great start to the week, and especially for me, who am an adventurer. Everything was going normal, and I went to load at the center of Monterrey, where they made glass. As they were very particular with the box where they had to load the glass, I cleaned the box and left. I went down the path to Caborca, then to General Bravo, to cross Ruiz Cortines, and to get to that glass factory, which was next to some roads where I had to get there and park for the register. It was 2:30 in the morning. Everything was perfect, except that I was sleepy, and I still had to load. For a moment I fell asleep, listening to music and thinking that they were going to talk to me about the load. Maybe it was time to go to sleep. When suddenly, a strong wind began to move the trailer. There was a very cold wind. I closed a window through which the air entered. It was dark, and I was there waiting for them to call me for the load. I was willing to continue sleeping, when suddenly, I heard a loud whistle, and I thought it was the guard who was talking to me. Immediately, I stopped to look, but there was absolutely no one outside. I thought it was a colleague, who was already waiting for his turn like another 15. So I went back to bed, but moments later, I heard that louder whistle again. I got really mad. I went out and looked everywhere without seeing anything. I returned to my trailer. It was the shift change of the company, but no one was coming. I closed my eyes and suddenly a terrible noise woke me up. It was like a rustle that was heard in my cabin. I stood still for a few minutes. And those scratches continued. Then, I heard some very strong steps. I thought it was a thief, so I climbed up the cabin from the outside, but there was no one. From the top of my trailer, there was a lot of silence. And at that moment, a laugh sounded in my ear, but I was completely alone inside. I entered my bunk and, of course, there was no one either. A cold shiver ran through my body, and that laughter kept ringing in my ears. I moved my head from side to see who it was. It was about 3 minutes, in which those laughs wanted to drive me crazy. I started to pray as my grandmother taught me. Then I took the steering wheel. At that moment I felt an icy wind that took over me as if someone was blowing from the passenger side. I was not mistaken. I slowly turned my head to that side, and there was a man who looked at me with a big smile on his face. When I tried to touch him, I saw that man fade in the air. That was the last thing I remember while I passed out. As time went by, a guard approached and woke me up because I had to register. That was one of the most terrifying experiences I've had as a trailer. I was driving through Oregon on Highway 84. I was talking with my wife through the headphones, when suddenly I saw it. I couldn't distinguish its legs, because it was like a cloud of black smoke that was crossing the road. But that cloud had the shape of a dog big enough to stand on the roof of the car. The immediate reaction was a cold chill running through my spine, and I had a bad feeling. My wife heard my reaction and my change of tone of voice. Then she asked me what happened. I told her I saw the black dog. She instantly knew what I was talking about, since she was more superstitious than I was. She asked how many times I had seen him. I told her only once. I slowed down and turned off my radio. And I stopped for a few minutes. Then I continued my way. Fortunately, I didn't see him anymore. But later I saw a police patrol with lights and sirens. Returning to where I came from, and behind that patrol came an ambulance. I think that black dog wasn't meant for me that day. I was lucky. Years ago, in the late 90s, a friend of mine was on his way to the center of Texas, heading to Laredo, to pick up a load. It was early in the morning, around 4. He had just spent a few days at home, so he wasn't tired. He was on one of those sinuous 2-track roads, absolutely in the middle of nowhere, when all of a sudden, he saw something on the side of the road at the edge. At first he thought it was an animal run over, as is usually the case. But when he got closer, he saw that in effect there was an animal run over. But besides that, there was someone crouched on the corpse of that deer. He remembers thinking that guy was taking the deer as a trophy, that he was a sick guy for doing that. But when he got closer, he could see that guy, or whatever, was eating that deer, taking pieces of meat out of his stomach and taking it to his mouth. And at that moment, he stops and looks at him. Then he started to stand up, and I saw that he was covered in hair. Maybe 3 seconds after that, he didn't even think about stopping. He started to step on the accelerator and get out of there as soon as possible. And as he was passing near him, that thing was looking at him. It wasn't looking at the trailer, obviously. It had the intelligence to know that there was a driver inside, and it knew where I was sitting. When he started to move forward, he looked through the mirrors, and that thing continued to look at him. It was very big. To this day, I'm afraid to remember it. Me, alone there on that road, in the middle of nowhere, and that strange creature looking at me. My grandfather, who worked as a driver when he was young, often had to cross the dam. Once, he had to cross it at night. He didn't like any hour. Something about it felt off. A weird vibe. But he always felt a heavy atmosphere when he passed by. It was already 12 at night. He was completely alone on that road. Very badly lit. When he was walking by her, he saw a girl. On one side is the fall into the water, and on the other the street is very high. In some parts it must be up to 50 meters towards the empty stream, the one that goes to the city. Although at first he was scared, as soon as he passed the girl, he felt a lot of guilt, a lot of sadness. Maybe it was a poor woman who needed help, to whom something had happened. So he stopped. Before he got off, he tried to look for her through the mirror, but he didn't see her anymore. He turned around, and there she was, already very close to the trailer. But just before he got there, she got on the railing and threw herself. She threw herself to the side of the empty stream. You can't imagine how he screamed. My son, the impression of seeing someone who had just been killed. He went quickly to the police station, which is very close by, and he told them what he had just seen. They went there, and he went back with them. He left the trailer at the entrance to the prison, and then he ran there, and he pointed at them right where she had thrown herself. In a few minutes, rescuers also arrived. They started looking for every inch and down, but there was nothing. They didn't find a trace of anyone who had thrown himself. And then, they asked him if he hadn't invented everything, or if he wasn't driving drunk. He swears to God that what he saw was as clear as if it had been a person. But the truth is that that night no one threw himself. But sometimes that's what happens. And maybe she's condemned to repeat her sin of taking her life. Maybe every night. Or every year. But he's sure that he's not the only one who's seen her do that. About 3 years ago, when I was learning to drive a fifth-wheel trailer, my teacher was an ex-companion of my father, from his old job. One Monday at about 12 p.m., we left for Monterrey and Nuevo Leon. Everything was fine, until suddenly he got out of the truck and told me to take the wheel. I gladly accepted. We traveled several kilometers. It was already night, like 3 in the morning, when he tells me to stop, since he wanted to go down to buy his dose. He usually bought cocaine. I stopped and he left. The place where he bought it was in the middle of a lot of empty lots. I waited for him for 2 hours, and he didn't come. When I was thinking of going down and looking for him, I heard a loud scream, very dark and excruciating, which made me think the worst. I quickly got off the trailer and ran to where I had heard the scream, but I didn't find anything. The truth is, I was very scared and I started to feel how the weather was getting cold and my skin was itching. So I decided to go back. It was about 20 minutes when I heard that same screaming scream again, and after that, about 5 minutes later, my partner left the bush, without any scratch and with nothing in his hands. As soon as we left, I could see that he was no longer the same. He had his gaze lost. He was quiet. I asked him, "What's wrong? Since we met at that place, you haven't spoken. Are you okay? Did something happen?" But I never wanted to mention what I had heard. He didn't answer me. I didn't insist. Until after several kilometers I asked him the same question again. Then he told me, "You won't believe what happened to me. When I was coming back, in the middle of the jungle I heard my name being said. When I turned, like 20 meters from me, there was a pig standing on 2 legs, and he was telling me with his hand, 'Come here.' But at the same time, he shouted very loudly and tenebrously. I was immobile. But when the pig started to approach me, out of nowhere a white cat came out and stood in front of him. This cat screamed as if it were going to fight him. By doing that, that pig disappeared. And a few seconds later, that little white cat also disappeared, but when he did it, he left a very rich perfume smell. And you know what caught my attention the most about that perfume? It was that it was the one my grandmother used. She just died a few months ago. This story, I know it's hard to believe. In fact, it was hard for me to believe it too. But those screams I heard in the cornfield, and the way he told me, left me with an immense doubt. It was a trip from Michoacán to Cancun. I had to carry a load of heavy metal and rods for the construction of a building. As is well known, in those years, it was all much calmer than today. The truth was very rare that they would assault you on the road. The common thing was small accidents, such as, for example, that a tire blew out or you got out of the road because of sleep and fatigue. That morning I was very calm driving as always, with a lot of caution. When out of nowhere on the side of the road I could see in the distance what seemed to be the silhouette of a woman. She was standing with a sign in her hand and she was lying next to a tree. As I got closer, I could see that in fact it was a beautiful woman who was standing on the shore, which is not normal at all, since it was late at night. In my interior, I thought and hesitated for a few moments to stop or not, because there were 2 options. that woman was real and needed my help in reality, or that it was a trap to try to kidnap me or steal the cargo and money from the travel expenses that I was carrying with me at that time. But even so, my curiosity and instinct to want to help was stronger than the fear that woman made me feel, so I stopped a little further ahead of her. I stopped the trailer, getting down with a small bat that I always carried with me for anything. As I approached her, I saw with a little bit of curiosity that she had on a very short green dress that let me see her well-formed figure in the dim moonlight. The fear for that moment had become something more than curiosity. I insisted a little louder, however, I could not get any answer. When I was already about 5 meters from that woman, who at no time gave me her face and looked down, I could realize with great terror, that woman had no feet, but she didn't float either, but from her calves down, she had horse hooves. When I saw this, I was frozen. I didn't know what to do. When that woman started to turn, I could see that she literally had no face. She just had a huge black hole. How could I get out of the amazement looking to get out of that situation? I ran to my trailer as fast as I could. I started it desperately and started driving. When I looked through my mirrors, I realized that thing was running behind me. At times, I could clearly feel how the trailer moved. It was as if something hit it from the back. But it was something impossible, since at that moment I had taken a great speed, some 160 kilometers per hour, or that's what the dashboard marked. I also thought that maybe they were just my nerves, or I was passing the bumps or small speed bumps without even seeing them. My desperation and my fear did not let me see well. Already advancing some 10 kilometers, I stopped listening to those blows that until that moment I thought it was because of the bad state of the road. I found a rest stop and stopped, a little to assimilate what had happened to me. I had etched in my mind the face and legs of that woman who had been left behind kilometers ago. My mind could not stop thinking about that. I took the rosary that I always had hung in the mirror and put it on my neck. I took a little of the soda I was carrying and rested. I was about to turn on the trailer again to continue with my way, when, from one moment to another, I began to feel a deep sleep and tiredness. I felt extremely weak. My vision began to cloud. I did not know when I fell asleep, nor how long had passed. But when I woke up, I looked at my watch, and it was already 4:18 in the morning. I closed my eyes to take another drink of soda. I turned on the truck. But this one didn't turn on. It said the battery was dead. This was very strange, because the lights and the radio did turn on perfectly. I stayed thinking for a few seconds about what was happening, and suddenly I felt clearly how they were getting up on the truck's step next to the co-pilot. It was very clear how someone or something got on the roof of the cabin and started jumping. I immediately raised the windows, trying to start the trailer, but it didn't start and I could feel it again. How that thing ran from end to end above the truck. It all remained silent for a moment, which I took the opportunity to lower the window and look out to see what was happening. Now, I didn't think it was just my imagination, because at that moment I already thought everything was possible. When I looked out the window, towards the back of the trailer, I saw what looked like a monkey. At least that's what I thought at that moment. It was a black creature with a humanoid shape sitting on its haunches, in the back of the trailer. I could see how that animal fixed its eyes on me and smiled at me. When I saw this, my whole body was filled with horror and a tremendous cold. I couldn't take it anymore with fear and nerves. I was in panic. I just asked God for the truck to turn on. When I tried to turn it on repeated occasions, that thing started to jump and move the unit, which intrigued me a lot since it was a fairly heavy truck and with the tons of metal it carried, it was something very complicated that it moved like that and only by such a small thing. I was about to run out into the middle of nowhere, but I stopped because I knew that if I did, that would be my end. Until after so many attempts, the trailer started. Immediately I accelerated like crazy again, and kilometers ahead, I could see in the mirror how that thing, with a great jump, got off the trailer and went into the bush. Upon reaching the next town, it was about 7 in the morning, and a little more relaxed. I found myself in a small cafe with other colleagues who were there having breakfast, who, when they saw me a little pale, asked me what had happened to me. When I told them what happened to me, drivers, for a long time now, could agree with me that that monkey and that woman had looked like them too, and that even some other companions had not had the same luck as I had, because these had died or had had serious accidents on that part of the road. After almost 30 years of all those events, today I have come across people who have seen those terrifying appearances in the same way. Something that undoubtedly shows that it does not matter the time or place, that everywhere, there are these kinds of strange situations, and it is difficult to find a logical explanation for them. In mid-2019, we traveled a lot along the route of Toluca, Torreón and Coahuila. On that route we deviated from the city of San Luis to Zacatecas. I had a partner named Carlos. He came last on the convoy and I came first. On the radio he told me that we were going slowly, since his father, who is also a trailer, was barely leaving San Luis Potosi. Carlos was already very out of shape, because, out of necessity, he had made 3 trips in a row. From Zacatecas to San Luis, it's like 230 kilometers of solitude, and it was already 1 a.m. I don't know when he got lost. I noticed that he was no longer behind me, only when I turned around. So I went ahead with my trip. The next day, I ran into him in Torreón. He told me that he couldn't take the sleep anymore, and that fortunately he saw a truck stop, which is a restaurant for trailers, and that he stopped there. Then he told me that he stopped to have a coffee. But there was a trailer that caught his attention, since it was Model 60, that is, the old ones. And the people who were inside were a little emaciated. He was attended by a woman who was very kind and who, when she saw him tired, advised him to lie down for a while and that would be the best for everyone. He, somewhat confused by what that woman had said, thanked her and greeted her. But he says that by doing that, the hand of that woman was cold. Then he went to sleep. It was not until 7 a.m. when his father woke him up and said, "Are you okay, son? What happened?" And Carlos told him that he had fallen asleep in the truck stop. Then his father said, "What truck stop?" When Carlos got up,